Hi everyone, Chloe with Flux here. Thank you for joining me today in our training on workflows. This training is a basic overview on what a workflow is and how the roles of your users relate to your workflows. In this Admin Basics workflow overview, we'll be addressing the differences between profiles and roles, how roles relate to the workflow, how to add a new state and select the category and state type, how to handle allowed roles, how to add transition buttons, what guard instructions are, and lastly, some pointers about modifying your workflow. If you have any questions at any time during the webinar, please type it in the questions section of your GoToWebinar panel. We'll be dedicating the last few minutes for questions and answers, so we'll be saving all of your questions until then. If we do not get to your question in time, we'll try our best to curate those and answer them offline in an extended Q&A. So let's go ahead and get started. The workflow is the process that takes you from the beginning of the grant-making activity all the way into the awarded state. All requests, grants, reports, payments, organization, projects, and amendments have workflows. Workflows reflect the current position of any given grant request along the grant journey. Internal staff members are able to move a request forward, backward, or reject the entry. Workflows reflect the current position of any given grant request along that grant journey. Internal staff members can move it backward or forward, but a staff member can only respond to a grant request when he or she has been credentialed to do so. Clicking on the status bar makes it easy to take a quick look to see where any grant is in the workflow cycle. The state is highlighted in white to indicate the step in the workflow. For instance, this particular request is currently in the pending external review state. Every workflow is made up of states and transitions. Clicking on the status bar again, you'll be able to take a look at the state. So in this case, you'll see pending external review is the state. A state is the step in the workflow and essentially the particular position in your process. Transition or trigger is represented by a button and is the event or transition that moves it from one position in the workflow to another. The transition button in this case is submit. Next, profiles and roles determine how a user interacts with the system and when they have edit permissions. All users who need to log into the system are assigned a profile, role, and program. If a user can't get into the system, it may be possible that they were added manually and they may be missing one of these two things. Be sure to check your user card if that is the case. When setting up your Flux platform, you'll want to be sure to distinguish profiles and roles. Profile permissions are set up by Flux before an organization goes live. Profiles are the same on all sites, so profiles types are standard for all Flux systems, whereas roles are specific to each foundation. The standard profile types are board, consultant, employee, executive, grantee, and reviewer. Please note profiles are predetermined in the system and you should not add any new profile types. In contrast, you can add as many roles as you would like. Roles are specific to your organization and determine who can take action, such as edit, update, or move a card forward and or backwards in an individual workflow. The green action button, so for instance, submit draft, will appear or not appear depending on the user's role at each workflow state. When an action button appears on a card, for instance, submit draft or reject here, it signals that the user has both the proper role and program permissions at that step in the workflow. Typical roles are grantee, program assistant, grant management officer, program officer, financial officer, and president. The great thing about Flex is that you can have as many roles as you want. So again, a person can have more than one role. So for instance, a program officer can also then be a community associate and have multiple roles for that same program. So again, he or she will be able to act at another state in the process as well. In addition, users can be restricted to the programs they have been assigned on the people or user card. When a new person is registered in your system and you connect them in the LOI, the default is to assign that user to all programs. However, you can limit a user to a specific program by limiting that user's role to one or more programs. So for instance, in this case, we can limit them access to only any requests that come through the Clear Skies program. So this particular program associate will not be able to then change the status of a request in the Environmental Conservation Program. It is important to note that a profile, a role, and a program must be assigned to a user, or he or she will not be able to take any action in the system. For a grantee to take action in the grantee portal, a relationship will have been established between the grantee and the organization at this LOI state. Then during the request state, the user will need to be linked as either a primary contact or a signatory contact in order to have edit permissions. Note that anyone who has a relationship to the organization will have shown up in that dropdown, but only if the grantee user has been linked as either a primary or signatory contact will he or she have editing permissions. Now we'll discuss adding a new state in your admin panel. You can create workflows to follow virtually any path through your organization. Please keep in mind, however, that only an admin can configure your organization's workflow. To add a new state, simply go to the bottom and click New State. Fill out the internal description. This internal description will be the back-end field name. Then you will want to add an external description. This is the label the grantee will see. A helpful tip to take note of, then, is that you can label the state as whatever you would like the grantee to see. So for instance, if you have a grant competition and want to notify all of the winners all at the same time, you wouldn't want certain applicants to know that their application is still pending President's review. Therefore, you can modify the external description to simply state pending review. Next, select the category. Categories drive certain behaviors and determine the action the state will take for that model type. For example, whether it will move forward internally, be sent out for external review, or become a grant. Examples of categories for a request include draft, new, approval, rejected, pending grant promotion, send back, and granted. Each model type has its own categories. So for instance, when a request is granted, you must have a granted category. However, this will move the request from a request card to a granted card and then assign a grant agreement date. Or if you want a request to move to an external reviewer for the review process, the pending external review category. can be used to allow them to access the reviewer portal. Now we will add a new state type. State types are the basic action types. The state types include workflow, new, rejected, and sent back. New is the first state type used for a state. Every state type after that is considered a workflow type in the process. Rejected moves the request to the rejected state. And lastly, sent back is only used if you have a separate sendback state. So for instance, if you want to send it to revisions required as a separate sendback state, you won't be sending that particular request back to drafts instead. You are sending it to a holding spot where revisions are required before it moves ahead. It's very important to note that state type is always used in conjunction with the sendback category. And just as a heads up, state types work across the board with all models. So next you'll see allowed roles. You will see allowed roles here under states, but you will also then see allowed roles again in event transitions, which we will delve into further in just a bit. It's very important to note that these are not the same thing. Allowed roles under state should never be checked by administrators. Though labeled as such, they have nothing to do with roles and are for specific profile roles only. If you check one by accident, the cards will disappear or become invisible to certain users. Please notice there is a warning under this allowed roles section to remind you to leave the allowed roles selection empty unless you wish to restrict the visibility. So now we'll want to add transitions or buttons so that we can move from one state of the workflow to another. It is very easy to add a new button. A pro tip though, before you even get there, is that you should add workflow state first and then add your buttons to and from. By keeping your old buttons, you can now refer to them before you modify or delete them. This is especially important because guard instructions are tied to the buttons. You wouldn't want to lose those instructions before copying them into the new transition state. So once you've done that, you're ready to add new event transitions or buttons by clicking on the plus square button in the dark gray bar. The first thing you're going to want to do is add a transition or button name. Then you'll see from states listed. The from state is always auto-populated. The next is the to state. This to state is going to select what the request is going to. Please note that every button also has a relationship to user roles. The roles assigned on the button establish rights and permissions of who can edit or not edit. It's important to note that you won't be able to save the transition buttons until you've added these allowed roles. Please note that these allowed roles are now in bold versus the allowed roles that we saw in the states section. Seeing as how they are bold and we again have no warning under it, we can then make sure we go ahead and actually assign an allowed role for this particular button. Remember that these are the same roles that were initially set up for you before your site went live in the user settings section. Be very careful in this user settings section that you are in the right tab when adding or modifying roles. Some users have accidentally added roles to the wrong section. You'll want to be in the second tab to add a new role. So what are guard instructions? Guard instructions here determine whether a button can be seen or not seen by a user, depending on whatever conditionality you would like. So for instance, if the grant request should go to the president for approval, it is asking for certain GARD instructions here. So if, for instance, a grant request is over 500K and you would like it to go to the president rather than going to the program officer, that can be done utilizing your GARD instructions. We will take a more in-depth look at GARD instructions in our hands-on training 101. So please be sure to tune in there for more information. So before we end off here, I want to leave you with a few big pointers to keep in mind. The first thing to keep in mind is that if you delete a workflow, it deletes it for all themes of that particular model type. So if you notice here, we have different workflow states, but if we take a look at a different theme within the grant request, for instance, medical application, you'll notice that the exact same workflow steps are in both of these themes. So of course you want to be careful when deleting from any form with more than one theme because it will delete them on all themes. This will also hold true for all other forms with multiple themes, including requests, reports, and reviews. So instead what you will want to do is move the unused state to the bottom of the page and then make sure you have removed all the buttons. If you do not delete it though, be sure to diligently go through every single workflow and make sure that no other workflow uses that particular state. I would also strongly advise that you make sure you modify your workflow on your pre-prod side first and run through your process to be sure everything is working just as you wish. Once you have it as you want, then start the process on your production site. So this concludes today's webinar on workflows, and I hope you enjoyed it. If there are any features that I did not cover extensively, like the details on building workflows, we will be hosting trainings in the future to address these features. You may also learn more about these features by visiting our knowledge base. Now let's go ahead and open it up to any questions. All right, a great question just came in. Why can't I see rejected grants in the list view of my grants, even though it is a workflow state? So the default is that rejected will be hidden from your list view. To go ahead and include rejected in your list view though, right next to your search bar, you'll want to open up the tab that opens up your action bar. You'll want to click on the gear icon, which will lead you to your filtering tool. And as you scroll down, you'll notice a checkbox that says Include Rejected Requests. The default is that for this particular selection to be unchecked. To go ahead and add rejected requests to your particular list view, you'll want to go ahead and click Include Rejected Requests and save. The next question, how many buttons can you have? The fantastic thing about Flux is that you can have an unlimited number of buttons. You can also have an unlimited number of workflow steps and roles. What I would strongly advise though, and if you notice here, we have many workflow steps, and again, this can be unlimited. But as I mentioned, workflows in a model type are tied to all themes of that model type. So I do strongly suggest that you try to keep your workflow as simple as it can be. The more workflow steps you have, the more diligent you'll need to be later when you want to make changes to your workflow. And we do get this question quite a bit. I named something draft or pending review in the internal description, but now I want to call it pending authorization. Can I do that? So when we go ahead and open up a workflow state, we'll notice again that there's an internal description here. This internal description currently says pending grant/FIP promotion. You can absolutely change this internal description name. After you've established the backend field name the first time, you can always go back in and change the display name of that state's name. As a reminder, again, internal description is the internal description that you as an employee will see on your internal site. So you can go ahead and feel free to change it depending on authorization. And instead, that is the label that you'll see internally. All right, so we're all out of time, unfortunately, for today. But for any further questions, please go ahead and make sure that you go ahead and ask them, and we will go ahead and follow up with both video recordings and any continued Q&A on our knowledge base. So in conclusion, today we went over the differences between profiles and roles, how roles relate to the workflow, how to add a new state and select the category and state type, how to handle allowed roles, how to add transition buttons, what guard instructions are, and a few pointers about modifying your workflow. To learn more and access the video recording of this webinar, along with an extended Q&A, please visit our knowledge base at flux.io/knowledge. There you'll be able to find a list of our upcoming webinars, links to register for future webinars, and recordings of past webinars under training webinars. Or feel free to ask us at support, and we'd be happy to help you. So thank you so much again for joining us today, and we hope to host you again at our next training. Have a wonderful day.